Hello there, beautiful people. In this video, I'm going to do something that I've never done before, which is a power ranking of every team in the NFL from worst to best. That's right, from 32 to 1 or 1 to 32, whichever makes you feel better. I'm going to rank every team, and you better sit there and you better enjoy this, or else I will start crying right now in the middle of this Bass Pro Shops that I'm recording this in. Let's begin! Number 32, the Tennessee Titans. This should not come as a surprise. This is the worst team in the league. They've been the worst team in the league for a hot minute now. They're currently 1-9. They're being outscored by 13 points a game. They have the worst offense in the league and a bottom 5 defense. Their number 1 overall pick, Cam Ward, has been extremely disappointing, even with the essentially non-existent expectations coming into the season, because everybody knew the Titans were going to be bad, and they haven't disappointed. They already fired their head coach a month and a half ago. Simply put, this is about as bad as a football team can possibly be without actually being winless. The video continues right after this short break. Before I begin, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of today's video, Factor. Living an active and healthy lifestyle isn't always easy and can feel overwhelming, but Factor gives you the flexibility to stay active without succumbing to a quick cheat meal when short on time. With an expanded menu, Factor is making accomplishing your wellness goals even more exciting. You can enjoy more nutritious and balanced meal options tailored to a wider range of health goals so you can reach them with ease. Factor is also adding more flavors to the menu so you can enjoy nutritious meals without compromising on flavor. Factor makes portion control easy with meals ranging between 350 to 550 calories per serving, and their clean and wholesome meals make weight loss stress-free. I've been sponsoring Factor now for several years, and I can tell you with 100% sincerity, these guys are the real deal. If you have not yet joined Factor or have given Factor a try, you are missing out big time. So what are you waiting for? Right now, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code BARRYFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code BARRYFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Number 31, the Las Vegas Raiders. You're 2-8. Your head coach is a 74-year-old man who seems like the game has passed him by. You're being outscored by almost 10 points per game, and you have one of the worst quarterbacks in the league that you signed to a big contract in free agency because you thought he was the answer. So much like the Raiders have always been since 2003, you're constantly looking for a quarterback and trying to get out of the doldrums. There are some nice building blocks here, obviously. Max Crosby, Ashton Genty, Brock Bowers. There is talent there, but really this team is going to remain in the dumpster until they find a respectable quarterback and a head coach that's up to date with the modern NFL. And also fuck Chip Kelly. Number 30, the New York Giants. It says a lot about how bad the Giants have been since 2011 because the high point of this season was beating the Eagles and improving to 2-4 on Thursday Night Football. Well, since then, they've lost 5 straight games. They fired their head coach finally, Brian Dable, but that's only the start. Your GM is dog shit, and although Jackson Dart has been promising when he's been on the field this year, he already seems like an injury risk for the rest of his career because he's already missing games with concussions. He's constantly going to the Blue Medical tent. Cam Scatabo looked like he might be a guy, but his ankle exploded, and now he's doing live streams. Will he come back and be the same player that he was? We don't know. So even though the Giants, and also Malik Neighbors as well, there's promising young pieces here, but we just don't know if these pieces can ever stay healthy. As of right now, your team is relying on Jameis Winston. You're 2-9. It's another lost season. You might already be eliminated from the playoffs, most likely after this week when you lose to Detroit. This situation in terms of the future isn't completely hopeless because of the reasons I mentioned, but as of right now, this is a team that has nothing to play for in yet another lost and meaningless season. Number 29. The New York Jets are back-to-back tenants of New Jersey here. It's very difficult to make the Jets look like the less crappy team in New York, but the Giants have somehow done it. But don't let that make you forget that the Jets are once again bad. And this is the story as old as time. It all goes back to the quarterback position. Outside of the road win versus the Bengals and maybe the first week of the season versus the Steelers, once again, another year, the Jets offense has been non-existent. And their defense, which a couple years ago looked like it might be the backbone of this franchise moving forward, they traded away Quinnen Williams, you traded away Sauce Gardner. Your defense also stinks. And like I said, you just benched Justin Fields for Tyrod Taylor, who's a 36-year-old journeyman quarterback who can't stay healthy. I am 31 years old, and I cannot remember the Jets having consistent production from their quarterback. And quite honestly, if the Jets, who are now going to miss the postseason for the 15th straight year, which is seemingly impossible, but if the Jets are going to actually become a sustainable and respected franchise, they're going to have to luck into a generational all-time great quarterback in the draft. That's the only way that I see them actually turning the franchise around. And if it sounds very gloomy, it is, because the chances of that happening are very slim. But extreme situations call for extreme outcomes. Number 28, the Cleveland Browns. Let's see here. You have one historically great player in Myles Garrett, and I'm checking over the roster right now, basically nothing else. And that's been the story for the last couple seasons. Much like with a lot of the other teams who rank low on this list, the biggest problem for the Browns is their quarterback position, and Deshaun Watson hasn't even played a snap this year. The Browns have the second worst offense in the league, but an elite defense spearheaded by the aforementioned Myles Garrett, but their offense is so horrible and so decrepit that they're consistently putting their defense in terrible situations. The Browns are 2-8. I believe that this will be Kevin Stefanski's last year, and just now we are finally getting to see Shedeur Sanders. I know that there are a lot of people who think that Sanders should have been playing from the very beginning when they used Joe Flacco, who's not even on the team anymore, and Dylan Gabriel, who has been about as bad as you would expect a rookie quarterback on a bad team to be, before finally getting to Sanders right now. And I don't want to make any grand declarations about a quarterback after he's thrown just 16 passes in the league, but I would bet a large amount of money that Sanders does not do well with the Browns. And if he ever does become a good quarterback in the NFL, it will not be with Cleveland. And just think, Browns fans, next year you're going to have to deal with Deshaun Watson again. 27, the New Orleans Saints. Every single year that goes by now for New Orleans, those playoff losses at the end of Drew Brees' career, when the Saints still had a respectable team, hurt all the more. And also all those years you wasted having a Hall of Fame quarterback going 7-9, well, guess what? Now your team still stinks, and you don't have a chance in hell at quarterback, considering you thought Spencer Rattler might be the guy, and unsurprisingly, he turned out to not be the guy, and now you're relying on Tyler Shuck, who is 26 years old and a rookie, okay? We all talk about Brandon Weeden. Remember Brandon Weeden got a bunch of shit for being, 30 or whatever, like 28 when he was a rookie? This guy, Tyler Shuck, is almost as bad. The Saints sit at 2-8, and they currently have the worst point differential in the NFC by a lot, getting outscored on average by 9.5 points per game, which is the fourth worst in the entire league. All those years with the salary cap jokes and the talent, those are all gone. There's really no game changers on this roster. Alvin Kamara is completely washed up. Unless Tyler Shuck ends up being a revelation, then this Saints team, you're going to be in the toilet for the foreseeable future. 26, the Washington Commanders. Think back to just a month and a half ago. The Commanders were 3-2 with a big win on the road versus the Chargers. Jaden Daniels was healthy. Everything seemed like it was going according to plan. And now fast forward, you've lost 6 straight. Jaden Daniels is now injured and out for the season. You're relying on Marcus Mariota, which is never a good sign. And perhaps most disturbingly is that your defense is horrible. And the reason why that's disturbing is because you hired Dan Quinn because of his defensive background. And that's one of the most amazing things about Dan Quinn, is that for his entire career, he's supposed to be a defensive guy. And when he's been the defensive coordinator for teams, like he was in Seattle when they had the Legion of Boom, and like he was in Dallas for 3 years, his defenses have actually been very, very good. But whenever he's been a head coach, his defense, supposedly his specialty, have always been horrible, which is why the Commanders going to the NFC Championship game last year, largely in spite of their defense, was very interesting to me. But now regression has hit them entirely. Now, I know some people are going to complain and say, oh, well, they didn't have regression. They just got hurt a lot. Well, that's what regression is, people. All right? You got hurt. You were the NFC Championship game last year, and now you're 3-8, and you're heading for a lost season. So last year, like I predicted, was an outlier, not the norm. The one saving grace, of course, is that Jaden Daniels, who is going to be 25 next season already, so he's not necessarily super young, and he has injury history, has shown that he's not terrible, so there is some hope in that sense. But if you're a Commanders fan, my biggest takeaway would be just because Dan Snyder is gone doesn't mean that your franchise is out of the woods. 25, Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals currently sit at 3-7, although they have the second worst point differential in the league this year, being outscored by 10.6 points per game. Really, the season for a lot of people with the Bengals was lost when Toe Burrow went down with a toe injury in week 2. But quite honestly, the Bengals offense has still been pretty good, especially with Flacco since he got there. It was those 2 embarrassing home losses to the Jets and the Bears, despite putting up 40 points a game in those 2 home losses, that really sunk the Bengals season this year. Now Burrow is coming back, but again, even with Burrow last year playing at a very high level, the Bengals still missed the postseason. And as we all know, the Bengals defense is horrific, potentially the worst defense in the league, which is saying a lot considering the Cowboys exist. Either way, it would take a miracle for Cincinnati to get into the playoff race, even though the AFC North isn't particularly dominant this year. And again, let's be real, as long as the Bengals have that horrible defense, whether Joe Burrow is at quarterback or not, they're not going to win anything of note. 24, Atlanta Falcons. There are certain teams that are just always destined to be bad. Even when they're good, you just know that heartbreak is right around the corner. And the Atlanta Falcons, if not for the Jets, would be the standard for postseason futility because they haven't made the postseason since 2017. The very fact that this team drafted Michael Penix Jr. last year, despite paying Kirk Cousins a crap load of money in free agency, was to specifically avoid the position they are in right now, which is quarterback hell. Kirk Cousins is completely washed up, and Penix is now hurt. So you pay all this money, you draft a guy high in the first round to avoid the exact situation you are currently in a year and a half later. This type of stuff just only happens to franchises like the Falcons. In terms of talent, this isn't a bad team, but they are headed for their 8th straight losing season. Raheem Morris will most likely be fired. Perhaps if you're a Falcons fan, the best case is that you hire a smart and innovative young coach and you nail the hiring process, something along those lines. Maybe a Clint Kubiak. Penix comes back from yet another injury and ends up becoming the franchise quarterback you want him to be. That's the best case scenario. What's probably going to happen is the Falcons end up hiring another crappy coach. The defense continues to be bad. Penix continues to regress, and the Falcons remain one of the most pitied and embarrassing franchises in the league. 23, the Arizona Cardinals. This looks like yet another transitional year for the Cardinals. We've probably seen the last of Kyler Murray in a Cardinals uniform, and this will most likely be Jonathan Gannon's last season at the helm. It's year 3 of his tenure, and they still haven't seen any noticeable improvement from when he was hired. There are some good pieces, though. Again, with this Cardinals team, Trey McBride looks like he's becoming one of the best tight ends in the league. Marvin Harrison Jr. has been somewhat disappointing in his career, but he still has the pedigree of a guy who could become an elite receiver. But one of the biggest problems the Cardinals have is that they just happen to play in probably the toughest division in the NFL, which is the NFC West, and their point differential isn't quite as bad as their record, but still, at the end of the day, you are what your record says you are, and currently sitting at 3-7, the Cardinals are looking to miss the playoffs for the 9th time in the last 10 years, and also going a decade officially without winning a playoff game. But at least Jacoby Brissett set the single game completion record in your blowout loss versus the 49ers last week. 22, the Miami Dolphins. One of the weirdest seasons I can remember from a team. It basically feels like Mike McDaniel has already been fired 5 times, but he somehow is still in charge of the Dolphins. And not only that, but after a 1-6 start and then later a 2-7 start, they have currently reeled off 2 straight wins and actually looking like a team that's made the postseason in each of the last couple years. However, this is the worst year of Tua's career, or at the very least since his rookie season, and I'm sure that Mike McDaniel will end up being fired after this season because they've already fired the longtime GM. But it would be kind of funny if they somehow ended up running the table, finishing at 10-7, and sneaking into the playoffs against all odds. But as it stands now, their last loss came to Baltimore on Thursday Night Football on October 30th, and now with a bye week this week, the next time the Dolphins will play a game is on November 30th. So take solace, Dolphins fans, in the fact that no matter what, your team will have gone at least 1 month without losing a game. Something to hang your hat on. 21, Carolina Panthers. That's right, the team that is currently 6-5 lands just outside the bottom 10 and is the first winning team in this video. Here's the deal. The Carolina Panthers are your classic example of a team that has a horrible point differential but a winning record. Why? Because when they lose, they get blown out, and when they win by the skin of their teeth, which, as we're seeing the opposite effect this year with a team like Kansas City, who has a big point differential but an even worse win percentage currently than the Panthers. The clutch time stuff is usually randomness and not sustainable, and that's what we have here. And the biggest reason why I have the Panthers ranked this low is because, despite Bryce Young having one of the best games of his career versus Atlanta last week, I still have zero faith in Bryce Young in the future. Teams without quarterbacks in today's NFL, it's extremely hard to win consistently. And even if you somehow do find a way to win, it's probably not sustainable. So as long as Bryce Young is under center for the Carolina Panthers, I will not take them seriously. And their remaining schedule is also not particularly easy. They have the 49ers, the Rams, the Buccaneers twice, and the Seahawks. So I could very easily see them going 1-5 and finishing with a losing record. But the bright side for Panthers fans is that Rico Dowdle is legit, and T-Mac, Teteroa McMillan, is the real deal and has lived up to his hype as the 8th overall pick at receiver. If Carolina could actually get an even respectable quarterback under center, they could be serious, especially considering the division they play in is very, very bad. But for now, they land here. And also, shout out to the fact that they have defenders named Michael Jackson and Bobby Brown on their team. 20, Minnesota Vikings. JJ McCarthy is the story here, and he's been the story really ever since last year when he was drafted. Even though he missed all of his rookie season, the Vikings stumbled into Sam Darnold, who at the time had his best season, before letting him go to Seattle because they thought that JJ McCarthy was going to be the guy. Now, all of that stuff is understandable, especially because you invested a first-round pick in McCarthy to be your franchise quarterback. And to this point, McCarthy has played just 5 games, and I really don't like calling a guy who's played only 5 games a terrible player, but really, so far, we've seen absolutely nothing that indicates that JJ McCarthy is going to be a good quarterback. He throws a bunch of interceptions, he takes a lot of sacks. Outside of the occasional random Kenny Pickett-esque game-winning drive stuff, he's been very, very bad. The Vikings have one of the worst offenses in the league, despite having one of the best skill positions in the league. The only thing that's really keeping this Vikings team from having an even worse record than they do at 4-6 is the fact that their defense rates out very, very well. The biggest stat for the Vikings that you need to know is that currently they are -9 this season in the turnover department, and they've had at least 2 turnovers in 6 of their 10 games. And with McCarthy under center, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. 19, Chicago Bears. Back-to-back NFC North teams. Here's the good news if you're the Bears. You're 7-3, and your first overall pick quarterback has taken the necessary step forward in year 2 after a very lackluster rookie season. Ben Johnson looks like he's the real deal, and despite the improvements, there's also hope that the team can still get even better. Now, let's get to the negatives. Despite your 7-3 record, you still have a negative point differential on the season. Now, again, this kind of says that you might be a little bit of frauds. Now, don't get mad at me, but also, I believe the turnover luck is also unsustainable because the defense thus far has forced 22 turnovers while the offense has committed just 6. Now, that's a very, very extreme ratio in the positive direction, and I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer, I really don't, but at some point, this is going to regress back towards the mean. And considering, despite this incredible turnover luck thus far this year, the team has still had to squeak out a bunch of wins. Once the turnover regression hits, things might come crashing back down to earth very quickly. But I will say this, I am a Caleb Williams fan. People have known this for for a long time if you followed my channel. So I do think the Bears have the right head coach. They have the right young quarterback in place. So I think that the future in Chicago, at least offensively, is about as bright as it's been really since I can ever remember, ever since the 1940s. So although this season might be a little bit fluky and you've gotten some lucky bounces and you've barely squeaked out some close wins against some bad teams, there is hope for the future. So don't talk to me about me being a hater or bad. I'm just giving it like I see it, but I do think that the Bears have the right head coach and quarterback in place, and that's basically the majority of the success in the NFL. 18, Baltimore Ravens. What a difference a month and a half makes. I think I said that before earlier in the video, but I'm too lazy to go back and check it out now. But in this case, it really does apply because the Ravens started out this year, as always, with championship expectations, and they completely crapped their pants. Lamar Jackson got hurt, they fell to 1-5, and everybody was calling for John Harbaugh's job and for a complete teardown of the roster. But since then, they've reeled off 4 straight wins, and they're finally seeming to round back into their regular season form. And it also doesn't hurt that they have several more winnable games on their schedule left. The pros are that, as always, the run game is dominant. You're second in the league in yards per attempt. But I will say also, after a really horrific start to the season, the defense over the last 5 games has really started to pick it up. Simply put, when Lamar Jackson is healthy, the Ravens will always have a chance at winning a bunch of games. That's why they're considered elite. That's why they've been in the playoffs consistently, and they've won basically 70% of their games with Lamar under center since he came into the league. The question with the Ravens is always, what can they do once they get to the playoffs? And it's also interesting that they are currently the same record as the Kansas City Chiefs, both 5-5. Both came into the season as title contenders with elite quarterbacks, and in Kansas City, the sky is falling, and in the Ravens camp, everything is looking up despite being the same. It just goes to show you that perspective and context really matters a lot. For me, I see the Ravens going on a run and squeaking into the playoffs this year, but only if Lamar Jackson stays healthy. I know, really incredible analysis. 17, the Dallas Cowboys. She's only 17. The gist with Dallas is the same as it's always been. Well, maybe not always, but the same since 1996. In particular, since Tony Romo took over. You have an offense that is very good, at least versus bad teams, as the Cowboys are 4th in points per drive and 3rd in yards per drive. We all know Dak Prescott against bad teams like the Raiders this last week can light them up, and he can still do that as well as anybody. But against teams that are good or in a big game situation, we all know that Dak is just not as good. We're in year 10 now, all right, and he still has just 2 playoff wins. So really nothing that Dak does in the regular season necessarily matters or changes his legacy at this point. But for all the criticism of Dak, the reason the Cowboys are currently 4-5-1 with a losing record despite their great offense is because, as you guessed, their defense has been horrific. That's the Matt Eberflus effect for you. And even though the Cowboys offense does seem legit and potent, as long as their defense is horrible, they're not a threat to anybody but themselves and will most likely miss the playoffs once again. God, your heart just goes out to Jerry Jones, doesn't it? Not really. 16, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Dead average. That's what the Steelers are this year, and that's what they've always been. Well, not always, but that's what they've been under Mike Tomlin for essentially the last decade. Ever since the Killer Bees broke up with Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, and Le'Veon Bell after 2018, the Steelers have been mediocre outside of that fluky 2020 season, and we're having the same thing here. They're destined to go 9-8. I talk about this every week. Aaron Rodgers, considering his age and his mileage, has been about as good as you could expect, to be quite honest with you. And this defense is a wild ride. You never know what you're going to get on any particular week. So the journey to 9-8 is unpredictable, but you know that's what your final destination is going to be. Great movie franchise, by the way. But this is basically the same story as usual with the Steelers. They're a good team. Well, actually slightly above average at best. A team that's destined to squeak in and lose decisively in the wild card round before signing another old former Super Bowl winning quarterback to take over next year. Well, either that or they stick with Mason Rudolph or maybe Will Howard. I don't know. It's not looking promising after Rodgers leaves. 15, the Los Angeles Chargers. We're now in year 6 of the Justin Herbert era, and the questions basically remain the same as they always have been, which is that on a week-to-week basis, you never know which version of Herbert and the Chargers is going to show up. And as we saw last week when they got blown out on the road by a very mediocre Jacksonville team, they fell to 7-4. Herbert threw for 81 yards, shout out Kobe, and basically destroyed all of the goodwill that this team has built up following a 3-game win streak. Simply put, you cannot trust the Chargers. No matter what their record is, you cannot trust this team, and you cannot trust Justin Herbert until he finally does something in the postseason. The knock on Herbert is going to be that he's this physical freak, and he's a good quarterback, but he's not in the elite tier. My biggest takeaway with this Chargers team is that there's really nothing particularly special about them. They're a very average team. They're 13th in points per drive. They're 12th in points allowed per drive. Their point differential, that is 8. So essentially, they're a 500 team, a team that will probably finish a win or two better than their record should be this year. And that might be enough to sneak into the playoffs this year and knock Kansas City out. But overall, I would say that this team is not destined to do anything come playoff time. 14, Jacksonville Jaguars. I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. When Trevor Lawrence is involved, neither team is ever out of a game, and that's what this Jaguars team is. Currently, you're 6-4 and completely unpredictable. I mean, absolutely unpredictable. But because the AFC South is so bad, and because the Jags have seemingly lucked their way into a tiebreaker over Kansas City and the Chargers for good measure, I think, despite the fact that I don't think this team is actually very good because Trevor Lawrence is completely unpredictable and doesn't really know how to anticipate throws, which will ultimately hold the Jaguars back from ever winning anything, I still think that this team will get into the postseason. And another reason for that is they have 2 games left versus the Titans, they have a game versus the Cardinals, and a game versus the Jets. So I believe that this team could very easily finish with double-digit wins, even though everybody and their mama knows that it's kind of fool's gold. And until they get an upgrade at the quarterback position, they're never going to be able to be taken fully seriously. I don't know if Liam Cohen is good or bad. It's kind of a little bit too early to really judge his head coaching tenure. But the nicest thing I can say really about Jacksonville is that with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 games so far this year, they've been competitive in every game, even though in some of those cases, the reason the game was competitive was because of themselves, and they haven't really blown out anybody besides the Chargers this last week. So not a bad team, but certainly not a team that is a threat to do anything in the postseason if they get there. 13, Carmelo, the Houston Texans. Here's the deal with Houston. Their offense, unpredictable. Their defense, absolutely legit. And their defense is the reason why they currently have a 6-5 record, which coming into this season would have been surprising to a lot of people because CJ Stroud, after his historically great rookie season, was considered the franchise and the franchise quarterback, and the Texans are only going to go as far as he goes. And although ultimately, if the Texans are ever going to get past the divisional round, they will need Stroud to regain his rookie season form. In the meantime, scraping by with Davis Mills and an elite historic defense might be enough for these guys to possibly get into the postseason. But let's be real, even though the defense might be legit, this is still an offensive-minded league. And so even the best defense is still going to give up a decent amount of points in games. And until CJ Stroud shows, because this whole Davis Mills thing in the last couple of weeks, that's been cute, whatever, we all know that it's a fluke. Unless CJ Stroud is able to regain his rookie season form, this Texans team will be fated to continue having wild card games on Saturday and either losing that or getting blown out in the divisional round, which has been their MO ever since they came into existence in 2002. A respectable team, but not a great team. Number 12, Tampa Bay. TB12, get it? Isn't that funny? Oh my God, I'm such a genius. Here's the deal with Tampa Bay. They started out 6-2 this year, but they've lost 3 of their last 4, and their offense has stumbled, as well as Baker Mayfield, ever since they improved to 5-1 versus San Francisco a month and a half ago. They still sit in first place in the NFC South, but they have a point differential of just 2. So they are literally one of the most average teams you can find. They're 14th in points per drive, and they're 17th in points allowed per drive. There's nothing particularly special about this team, and the most troubling sign, I guess, is that they haven't beaten any good teams, really. They've lost to Philadelphia, they lost to Detroit, and they lost to the Patriots and the Bills. So by virtue of the NFC South being complete dog shit once again, they still will probably make the postseason, and I have a feeling that Baker will probably get back on track after a little bit of a drought here. But unless this team is going to face Philadelphia in the postseason, I don't know if they're going to do anything. My outlook on the Buccaneers isn't as positive as it was a month or 2 months ago. But hey, a lot of football left. That's why they play the games. 11. Green Bay Packers. Packers are currently 6-3-1, but questions remain over largely their quarterback, Jordan Love, who is becoming a little bit more polarizing among NFL fans, I've noticed, because statistically his numbers look elite, but the eye test doesn't quite match up with that. And like I've said before, the other thing with Love is that in the playoffs the last couple years, he still hasn't done anything really notable. He was amazing versus Dallas, and then he threw a season-ending interception, and then last year versus Philly, he was terrible. So Packers fans, they might hate it, but the fact is that until Jordan Love goes on a deep playoff run, the questions about him and being inconsistent or him having bad games like he did against Philadelphia and Carolina, back-to-back disappointing weeks, are always going to be mentioned and talked about. But this is a Packers roster that is basically in line with what we've seen from these guys for the last 30 or so years, is that they got talent, but you just know that they're going to find some way to mess it up come postseason time. And also their fans are very, very, not ungrateful, but just very grouchy and pessimistic about everything. But again, this is why you play the game. You're playoff chokers until you're not. And whether or not Jordan Love is as good as people say he is or as bad as people say he is, he'll have a chance to change the narrative as this season keeps going. Number 10, Kansas City Chiefs. It feels crazy to have a team that's made 7 straight AFC Championship games and 5 of the last 6 Super Bowls and won 3 of the last 6 Super Bowls in the 10 spot, but that's what happens. Do I think this Chiefs team is better than their record? I guess. In the same way that in the past couple seasons, they might not have been quite as good as their record in the regular season because they won a bunch of close games, and now that close game luck seems to be evening out. Here's the deal. I've already gone over it, but I'm going to go over it again. I've seen a lot of people talk about, this is weird. The Chiefs, their numbers look good, and yet their record's worse than ever. Yes, that's because they're a team that this year, when they've won big, and when they've lost close games. Simply put, the reason why this Chiefs team is at number 10 and not lower is because of their track record and because they have Mahomes, and really until I actually see them get eliminated, I won't believe it. They're very much like a serial killer or a Michael Myers or a Jason at the end of a horror movie where you shoot them up or you blow them up and you think everything is hunky-dory, and then just when you think they're dead, they come back to life. So would it surprise me at all if the Chiefs rip off 7 straight wins and go into the postseason 12-5? Absolutely not. But I do think that their offensive philosophy is flawed and that their defense isn't very good, particularly at getting off the field. So I don't think this Chiefs team is going to win the Super Bowl, but I still think they will make the postseason, even though at this time that is in jeopardy. Shout out to Alex Trebek. Number 9, San Francisco 49ers. Here's the deal with the 49ers. I think this team, to be honest with you, quite frankly, is flying under the radar a little bit. To me, if this team was going to be out of the postseason, I think we would have known that by now, because they've dealt with a bunch of injuries, particularly at quarterback with Brock Purdy. And I know a lot of people have always been kind of undecided on Purdy. Is he just another guy who plug and play into Kyle Shanahan's system, right? But even though Mac Jones did about as well as possibly expected in the 8 games that he was taking up with Purdy, I do think this 49ers team is more dangerous with Purdy. They got Purdy, they got Christian McCaffrey, Ricky Pearsall is coming back, you still got George Kittle. Offensively, I think this team is very, very good, even though this to me, this team reeks of a team similar almost to maybe the 2010 Packers, or a team that isn't necessarily great record-wise in the regular season, but they get healthy, and not necessarily healthy, but they get right in the groove at the perfect time going into the postseason. I would not be shocked to see the 49ers make another deep playoff run this year before they inevitably choke, because that's what they always do. They haven't won a Super Bowl since '94. They're essentially the Dallas Cowboys, except they wait to choke until the conference championship game or the Super Bowl. And so I could see this being another season where that happens. But this is a team that right now, in my opinion, is flying a little bit under the radar, and they're a team to watch out for. Number 8, the Buffalo Bills. The Bills are in a very testy time right now because, remember, once Brady left, it was supposed to be Josh Allen's time. And over the last 5 years, it kind of has been, at least with the AFC East. The Bills have won 5 straight division titles. But now, you got Drake May emerging emerging in New England, and the Bills probably won't win the AFC East this year. But more concerningly is the fact that they have several really, really bad losses on their record so far this year. The most recent one being the terrible loss versus Houston on Thursday Night Football. They also got blown out by Miami, and they got blown out by the Falcons all on the road. Of course, the saving grace with this team is always Josh Allen. Whenever he's under center, you're always going to have a chance to win, no matter what the situation is. And also, James Cook is having an all-pro caliber season, so the running game is very good. Josh Allen is inconsistent and babied incessantly and won a DEI MVP last year, but he still is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Their offense is 3rd in points per game and 4th in yards per game. Their defense is 16th in points, but also 8th in yards. So for all the hoopla and all the bitching and moaning for Bills fans, I still think this is going to end up like it usually does, with them losing in the divisional round or the conference championship game. Although this year, there's a little bit of a twist. It most likely won't be against Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes. So Bills fans at least have that to look forward to. 7, Seattle Seahawks. Every metric really says that this Seahawks team is one of the best teams in the league. They're 9th in points per drive. They're 4th in points allowed per drive. Sam Darnold, even after his disaster class versus the Rams last week, is still one of the best statistical quarterbacks in the league this year. Jackson Smith and Jigba has been arguably the best receiver in the league this year, but the big bugaboo with this Seahawks team is the turnovers. They are dead last right now in turnovers, and let's be real, the biggest reason why I'm not convinced about this Seahawks team is because of Sam Darnold's track record or lack thereof. That's really what it comes down to. I think that this Seahawks team, they really have all the ingredients to be a Super Bowl contender, but with Sam Darnold there, you're just consistently waiting for him to combust. And to this point in his career, we haven't really seen him play well when the chips are down. And until he does, the Seahawks can win and they can have as great a metrics as they have in the regular season, but that's always going to prevent them from being considered in the real top Super Bowl contenders. But still, 7 out of 32 teams isn't necessarily that bad of a ranking. But again, until Sam Darnold shows he can play well when the chips are down, there's always going to be a yeah but with Seattle. Number 6, Detroit Lions. How do we judge the Lions? Well, they were everybody's favorite team and media darlings, and they had that Cinderella run to the NFC Championship game a couple years ago, which they should have won if they didn't choke away a 17-point lead. And then last year, they had a magical season, winning 15 games before flaming out versus Washington. And now this year, they've still had success, but they haven't been quite as dominant as in years past, although they have much of the same pieces in place as before, particularly with Jared Goff. But again, with a lot of these, and I understand with a lot of these rankings, it sounds almost like we're a broken record, but let's just be real. When it comes to these rankings, it almost always goes back to the quarterback. And Jared Goff, I think at this point, has now shown that he can be a very good, or potentially even great regular season quarterback, but his playoff career has been very up and down. And whenever he is bad, he is really bad, as we saw versus Philadelphia. So against the big boys, I still don't fully trust Jared Goff. And at the end of the day, that's really what a lot of this stuff comes down to. But this team is still liable to scoring 35 plus points and beating mediocre to below average teams in their sleep, which is a lot more than you could say about the Lions in any season really before 2022. But still, they land at number 6 here. And if you really think about it, I feel like that's pretty appropriate. Number 5, Denver Broncos. Broncos, they're 9-2. And you know what team this team reminds me of? This team is essentially the modern version of the Mark Sanchez Jets, because this is a team that has a dominant defense that is finding ways to win in spite of their young, highly touted quarterback. And I say young in quotes because Bo Nix is almost 26 years old already. And the thing about Bo Nix, he does 2 things well. He's very good at engineering 1 or 2 drives per game, and he's very good at avoiding sacks. And because the Broncos defense is so great, they're 2nd in points allowed per drive and they're 1st in yards allowed per drive. Because this Broncos defense is so great, Bo Nix has a very big margin for error and he's allowed to dick around for most of the game. It's very similar to those Jets teams that made back-to-back AFC Championship games with Mark Sanchez, famous stabber. Here's the deal though. The Broncos are a objectively below average offensive team, to put it mildly. They're 23rd in points per drive. They're 24th in yards per drive. They don't sustain drives very well, and Bo Nix's passing numbers are very bad. The one saving grace offensively for the Broncos is the fact that they do have a good rushing attack, but this is a team that, similar in a way to the Texans, they'll have a chance in every game because of their defense, but you just feel eventually eventually their luck will run out because the quarterback position is the weakest link. Number 4, New England Patriots. Another 9-2 team that is very complicated. Here's the deal. The Patriots, the simple reason why they're not ranked higher is because they have a laughably, historically terrible schedule. That's just the reality. I know Patriots fans, believe me, I know Patriots fans are fucking obnoxious, right? And they kind of went into their holes for a little bit there, but now that they're good again, and now because they have a good quarterback again, they're out and they're their same obnoxious selves as they were before. But just because this team might not be as good as their record because they've had a cupcake schedule, that does not mean that this is a bad team. And the biggest reason why I don't think they are a bad team is because Drake May has been remarkably consistent. I wouldn't give him the MVP because of the laughably easy schedule and the fact that the way the Patriots games have unfolded this year is they've been front running a lot. They've gotten out to big leads and they've kind of held on, and that's allowed Drake May to kind of have a low volume, super high efficiency type of season. We haven't really seen him outside of the Buffalo game on the road, really, where he kind of has to throw in these obvious passing situations and he has to throw 35 plus times a game while his team is losing. Everyone's talking about Mike Vrabel, but to me, the biggest acquisition for the Patriots was Josh McDaniels as offensive coordinator. I understand that he's one of the worst head coaches of all time, but I think at this point, he's proven that he isn't, as an offensive coordinator, he isn't just a product of Tom Brady. He got Matt Castle paid. He helped get Jimmy Garoppolo paid. Kyle Orton had his best seasons in Denver with Josh McDaniels, and now we're seeing Drake May. Also, Mac Jones had his best year in New England with Josh McDaniels as a rookie, and obviously, like I said, Drake May. I think Drake May will eventually regress statistically, and I think he's had a very adverse-free season thus far. He hasn't really had to face a lot of adversity, but I do think May is good, and I do think that unfortunately the Patriots will win the AFC East, and they might win the first round bye. They might get the 1 seed. The only thing that might really prevent them from going far in the postseason is just their inexperience and the fact that Drake May hasn't played in the postseason thus far. But I think this is a team that is a good team with a bad schedule, which makes them look like a great team, but they are not a bad team. That needs to be said. This is not a bad team, but they're not quite as good as their record says they are, in my opinion. But they're still one of the better teams in the league this year, and that's why they land at number 4. Number 3, Indianapolis Colts. I would say the Colts are probably the biggest surprise team of this season because especially once they announced that Anthony Richardson lost the starting quarterback battle to Daniel Jones in the offseason, I think everybody, including myself, thought that, well, we're destined for another forgettable, mundane season with the Colts. They might win 7 or 8 games at best, but that has not been the case. They've been 8-2 now, although there is a little bit cause for concern. There was let's just be honest, there's always been a bit of a insanity type of feel to this Daniel Jones season, and the wheels have kind of started to come off a little bit in the last 2 games. The turnovers have spiked. He's come back down to earth a little bit, and again, because the Colts play in a bad division and they've had a pretty easy schedule thus far, that might be enough to get them into the postseason or potentially still get the 1 seed. And obviously, Jonathan Taylor is going to be first-team All-Pro. He's been the best running back in the league this season, leads the league in yards, touchdowns, first downs, yards per game, yards per attempt. He's been dominant. He'll probably get some MVP votes. It'll obviously eventually end up going to a quarterback, but Jonathan Taylor will be in the MVP discussion. He's basically this year's version of Saquon Barkley from last year. So even if Jones keeps progressing, which I believe he will, I don't believe in Daniel Jones, the Colts running game is dominant, so that will still give them a chance to win every Sunday, even when Daniel Jones inevitably regresses. But at the end of the day, I just can't really say this team is a championship contender as long as... I'm sorry, I gotta see it to believe it. I just don't trust Daniel Jones when the chips are down. And that's why they're not number 1 or number 2 in my rankings. But hey, 3rd overall, Colts fans, you should be very happy with the way this season has gone thus far. Number 2, the LA Rams. This Rams team looks like a juggernaut. They're 5th in points per drive. They're 3rd in points allowed per drive. They're currently 3rd in margin of victory. All of the metrics, they have great balance. Matthew Stafford is having by far the best season of his career, and at this current point, he's the MVP frontrunner in my opinion. They're 8-2, and this is a team that really, you talk about weaknesses, they don't really have any glaring weaknesses in my opinion. Their biggest thing is that they're not a great running game. They don't have a great running game. Stafford isn't a great scrambler. Kyron Williams is a good running back, but not a great one. But still, you think about it, this is a team, obviously Stafford, he's won a Super Bowl. McVay, They've won a Super Bowl together. So unlike a lot of the other teams, there's not the question of can they win the big one, right? And defensively, this team has a bunch of talent really everywhere. And I really think that when the dust settles, this team versus the Eagles, the Eagles versus Rams, if everything goes according to plan, will be the NFC Championship game. And as an Eagles fan, I got to say, I know that they played the Rams earlier this year and we had that comeback win, but I would not want to face this Rams team because they seem to really have no weaknesses, or at least no glaring weaknesses, which is why they land here. But number one is the Philadelphia Eagles, and this is really, it's very similar with why Kansas City was in the top 10 despite their mediocre season. It's about track record. This is a team, the defending Super Bowl champions. They're currently 8-2, and this is a team. And again, I'm always biased. I get it, but to me, this is a team that they just seem like a team that is kind of going through the motions in the regular season and just waiting to get to the playoffs, and they're still 8-2. Of course, the biggest story with the Eagles this year has been the nonstop A.J. Brown drama, but I really believe, and again, this is where track record matters. When you're the defending Super Bowl champions and you're the current number one seed in the NFC, again, that could change, but as of right now, as I am making this video, if you're the defending Super Bowl champs with the same core as your Super Bowl winning team and you're the current one seed, you're going to be my number one in the power rankings. And I would do this for any other team that was in a similar situation. It just so happens that my favorite team is number one here. I fully believe, and maybe this is just me being hopeful, I don't know, but I really believe that when the chips are down, that Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense, they will show up in the postseason. They will show up, all the bullshit aside, all the drama with A.J. Brown aside. They'll stop fucking around, they'll stop coasting, and they will get the job done. Defensively, this is a team that early in the year was kind of underachieving, but now they seemingly are going into swing. They've been amazing the last two games. You know, the biggest weakness with this team is their offensive play calling, but again, I just feel like this is a team that is really just playing to get to the postseason, and once they get in the postseason, I think that they will once again be an extremely difficult out, and they will play better offensively. However, the major concern is the fact that Saquon Barkley and the running game and the run blocking specifically is the biggest worry for me. To me, they have 7 games left in the regular season. The biggest key to look for the Eagles in the last 7 games, it's not the A.J. Brown shit, it's how well they run the ball, and it's how well they run block. And if their run blocking shows great improvement in the last 7 games of the season, then I think this team, barring injuries, is going to repeat as Super Bowl champions. Take care, everybody.